Formel 1 Testfahrten sind eine Seltenheit geworden. Umso mehr profitierte Oscar Piastri von den privaten Formel 1 Tests, die ihm Alpine ermöglichte. Aber wie genau sieht die Arbeit der Ingenieure an so einem Testtag aus? Unser Christian hat bei Dominic Hale, dem Race Support Team Engineer von Alpine, nachgefragt.
My name is Dominic Hale. I am the Race Support Team Engineer. Basically, it's similar to sort of the race engineer department that run the race cars. So it's car setup work and working with the drivers to extract lap time.
So today you were working very closely with Oscar, but when Oscar's not testing, and he's doing quite a lot of tests, but in Formula 1 channel there are not so many testing days anymore. What are you doing then?
So between these tests, I either frequent in the race control room at Enstone. This is just to stay close to the proceedings of the race drivers and the race team, so anything we do here with Oscar is representative of the actual race season.
We are a bit delayed because the briefing took so long. How did the testing day go today?
Testing today was very good. I think we learnt quite a lot of things. This isn't necessarily about the car, it's learning what Oscar likes of a car, so when he moves forward through his career, he's already sort of fairly knowledgeable on how he'd like to set the car up.
That's exactly the point. This is all about Oscar and not so much about the car. Usually when you go testing, you have sensors, rakes, doing all the different stuff. How different is it from your perspective, having such a testing day compared to a normal Formula 1 test?
It's not actually too dissimilar because the car is still fairly highly monitored, because you need to check that the car is performing as it did in its race season. The main difference is obviously we're not testing new parts, so we know exactly how the car should perform. We're not looking for new performance. We're just generally learning and getting Oscar up to speed on how a car performs and how to extract speed from it.
Are you doing a lot of setup changes just to make him familiar with how that feels in the car?
Yes, we do. We tend to sweep through a lot of the setup items that we would have during the race season with this car. So when he was close to the debriefs during that year, he now actually gets to experience them and draw his own conclusions on them.
You're testing here with the A521,
yes.
So last year's car. Is it exactly the same as you've used it last year in the season, or is there anything different?
No, by regulation, the car has to be basically as raced within season. The only, or the primary difference is the tyres themselves are of an Academy range, which is a specific compound range by Pirelli for these sort of tests.
That you do not get any knowledge of the tyres, which is not so much needed anymore because the current tyres are completely different.
Exactly. We do gain knowledge obviously as we use them, so we get to compare them to the compounds that were used in season. So when we do long runs, we obviously get to compare how the tyre performance evolves, the warm-up, all these kind of things. And it's also important to understand these new tyres because we need to draw conclusions with Oscar about how they differ.
How different are they?
Generally they appear to be very, very similar. One of the primary differences perhaps is that they perform a little bit better at lower temperatures, because they're made to be obviously more usable by young drivers, so they don't have to be energised quite as highly to make them work, but the peak performance looks fairly similar.
How about the engines, because these engines are so sophisticated, or not call them engines, power units.
Yeah.
Are they made completely new to the old specifications you used last year? Are they from the stock, or how's that working?
Again, by regulation they have to be exactly as ran in year. We are using the pool of engines from the race season. As with all the PUs, obviously there is a lifing aspect, so we tend to be a bit kinder on them. We don't do the full quality deployment every single lap because we've got a year or two to run these cars now. But in terms of absolute ultimate performance, it would be as in year, and it is available to us if we wanted to run it.
How is Oscar compared to the can you tell us some other drivers you've worked with and compare them to Oscar?
So through the Academy we've obviously worked with sort of a fair fleet of people. Last year was primarily Christian Lundgaard and Wan Huzhou, who went through a similar programme. Also worked a bit with Esteban during racing last year as well.
Oscar is quite a super talent if you just look at his track record. Formula 3 champion in his rookie season, Formula 2 rookie in his championship in his first season. That's quite impressive. Do you see that during a test as well?
I do. In terms of absolute performance, you probably just have to rely on his championship record to prove that one, because as I say, with differences in tyres and conditions, you can't always compare to the laps that this car has driven in previous events. But from what we've seen, the performance isn't lacking at all. And in terms of his work mentality, he's very quickly picking up all the things that we're throwing at him, and is also doing it in a very sort of calm and regulated manner.
You've mentioned that you have the data from last year, which is not 100% comparable, but I'm pretty sure you look at some overlays, how Fernando and Esteban coped with this track. What else are you analyzing? Are you looking at onboard footage to help him? Are you sending people trackside, driver coaches, whatever?
A little bit of some of those. The video perhaps isn't too critical for us, because as with the race cars, it's all there in the data somewhere. During the year, we do have additional engineers come out basically to give or expose him to the sort of information he would be receiving as a race driver. So if we have an aero specialist, if we have a tyre specialist, how you would save tyres in certain conditions. We have vehicle performance engineers explaining how the brake systems work and how we manage brakes, etc. Just at different events during the year, whichever sort of locations are most relevant to each topic.
So this is all about educating Oscar, making him the next Formula 1 driver. What about the engineers? Is this also a good testing program for young engineers, trainee program or whatever?
It's definitely that as well, because effectively the car is exactly the same. There's exactly the same tools, exactly the same data to crunch and diagnose. So it is also a good opportunity, not only for the engineers but also the mechanics and other personnel are all basically they're primed and prepped and ready to step into the race team if they're needed, as many of them have done so far.